Good morning, students. I hope you have listened to the summary of memories of childhood very carefully in my last video. This chapter is, the author of this chapter is Zitkala Sa and Bama, as you can see in the book. Today, we are going to cover the reading part of this chapter, and I hope you all have your books with you and you will cooperate with me in reading the chapter. Okay, so this chapter, Memories of Childhood, is basically divided into two parts. That is the cutting of my long hair, and the second part is we too are human beings. So today I am going to cover the first part, that is the cutting of my long hair by Zitkala Sa. So we are going to read the first part of the chapter, that is the cutting of my long hair by Zitkala Sa. So as you can see, I have written the word meanings also in the book for your convenience, and so that you are able to actually see the meanings and write them in your note, in your books. Now the first day in the land of apples was a bitter cold one, for the snow still covered the ground and the trees were bare. Now what do you mean by bare? Bare means not covered. A large bell rang for breakfast, its loud metallic voice crashing through the belfry. What do you mean by belfry? That is the bell tower overhead and into our sensitive ears. The annoying clatter of shoes on bare floors gave us no peace. The constant clash of harsh noises, with an undercurrent of many voices murmuring an unknown tongue, made a bedlam. Bedlam means confusion, within which I was securely tied, and though my spirit tore itself in struggling for its lost freedom, all was useless. Now this is a paragraph which is explained by Zitkala Sa. Zitkala Sa is explaining to us in this paragraph her first day in the land of apples, and she's saying that the experience was very bad when she entered the first day in the land of apples. Now she's trying to explain us that a large bell rang for breakfast, and there was clatter of shoes and bare floors gave us no peace. And though her spirit tore itself in struggling for its lost freedom, but all was useless for her. Now let's see what she experiences further. This is Zitkala Sa. A pale false-faced woman with white hair came up after us. We were placed in a line of girls who were marching into the dining room. These were Indian girls in stiff shoes and closely clinging dresses. The small girls wore sleeved aprons and shingled hair. Shingled hair means cut hair. So Zitkala Sa is telling us that a pale faced woman with white hair came up after us, and all the girls were placed in a line and they were told to march for the dining room. Now these Indian girls, they were in stiff shoes and they were wearing closely clinging dresses. Clinging dresses means the dresses which were clinging to their bodies. And the small girls, they wore sleeved aprons and shingled hair. Means the small girls were having shingled hair and they were wearing sleeved aprons, right? So as I is Zitkala Sa, walked noiselessly in my soft moccasins, I felt like sinking to the floor, for my blanket had been stripped from my shoulders. So this is a very important line in this chapter. The first humiliation which Zitkala Sa faced was that blanket had been stripped from her shoulders. I looked hard at the Indian girls, who seemed not to care that they were more immodestly dressed than I in their tightly fitting clothes. So she's saying that the Indian girls, they were very indecently dressed and they were wearing tightly fitting clothes, and nobody bothered about them. While we marched in, the boys entered at an opposite door. I watched for the three young braves who came in our party. I spied them in the rear ranks, looking as uncomfortable as I felt. A small bell was tapped, and each of the pupils drew a chair from under the table, supposing this act meant they were to be seated. I pulled out mine and at once slipped into it from one side, but when I turned my head, I saw that I was the only one seated, and all the rest at a table remained standing. Just as I began to rise, looking shyly around to see how chairs were to be used, a second bell was sounded. All were seated at last, and I had to crawl back into my chair again. I heard a man's voice at one end of the hall, and I looked around to see him. But all the others hung their heads over their plates. As I glanced at the long chain of tables, I caught the eyes of a pale-faced woman upon me. Immediately I dropped my eyes, wondering why I was so keenly watched by the strange woman. So as you can see in this whole paragraph, Zitkala Sa is trying to explain her experience in the dining room, that how she was the only one sitting on the chair, and how this pale-faced woman was looking very closely in a very strange way at her. The man ceased his mutterings, ceased means bring to an end, and then a third bell was tapped. See, the third bell was tapped. Let's move on to the next page. Everyone picked up his knife and fork and began eating. I began crying instead, for by this time I was afraid to venture anything more. So everybody started eating in the dining room, but Zitkala Sa, she started crying because she knew that there was something strange coming up for her. But this eating by formula was not the hardest trial in that first day. Late in the morning, my friend Judwin gave me a terrible warning. Now, one of friends of Zitkala, that is Judwin, she gave her a very terrible warning. What warning was that? Judwin knew a few words of English, and she had overheard the pale-faced woman talk about cutting her long, heavy hair. Our mothers had taught us that not only unskilled warriors who were captured had their hair shingled by the enemy. Among our people, short hair was worn by mourners and shingled hair by cowards. So here I am going to stop, and in my next video I am going to continue with the rest of the chapter. So I am going to explain it to you that only those people, the Zitkala Sa's mother had taught her that short hair, cut hair were worn by the people who were captured by the enemies, and they used to cut the hair of the people who were captured by the enemy. Or who else wore short hair? They were worn by mourners. Mourners means the people who were sad on the death of somebody, and shingled hair by cowards, or cowards used to wear shingled hair, means cut hair. So these are all very important lines, and this you have to underline in your books there, because these are important lines from question answers point of view, because a question can come that who wore shingled hair in American culture according to the author. So this is the answer, that the shingled hair were worn either by unskilled warriors who were captured and their hair were cut by the enemy, and among other people short hair were worn either by mourners or by cowards. So okay.